All right, Rabbi, say good morning, a good tavach, beautiful beginning of the week together. Beginning by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning shir, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, the Daf Yomi shir in memory of Mr. Milton Martyr Mordechai David Ben Raphael HaKohen, Shirley Elbaum and family for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month, creation of the yard site of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Koppel, Ben Rav Avram Menachem. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, and the schus for the Fushlim for Rabbi David Katz, Rav David HaKohen Ben Leah, and Said and Sima Haken, Le'iloi Nishmas Sima's parents, Miriam Bas Elazar, and Yecheskel Ben Aga Sela. And also to thank the Hakens for sponsoring the Mizonos this morning in memory of Sima's parents as well. We hope that in the merit of all of our Talmud Torah and the brachas, the merit Hashem, the Neshamos Haben Aliyah, and the families in Nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Chole Yisrael. Both with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us. There are actually some really interesting sugyas coming up over the next couple of days. Today's daf is Ayin Hey 75. Thanks to Rabbi Richter. Yesterday we got a little of a head start on today's daf. We're picking up today, Meretz Hashem, at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah on Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, about halfway down the page. However, the Ishto, a man says to his wife, Rabbi say the truth is we've actually seen a number of these concepts already quoted in earlier sugyas. So now it's an opportunity for us to see it kind of firsthand. However, the Ishto, a man says to his wife, so here's the scenario. Reuven's married to Rachel. And Reuven says to Rachel, listen, I'm going away. And any Nedarim that you vow from now until I come back from this certain place, right? It's like ultimately, again, should be upheld, should be affirmed. So we'll say, what's happening over here? Proactive affirmation. So again, he's giving a timeline. So whatever Nedarim happens between now and when I come back from wherever place that I am, ultimately again should be affirmed. What's the halacha? Lo amar klum. The Mishnah says such a statement is absolutely meaningless. Now I will say, why is it that it's meaningless? So if you take a quick look at the rush. So the rush is in the right-hand column, the right-hand margin. And again, like the second perush in Yemisuras Hashas, Hagos Habach, and then right in the right-hand column, the rush. So if you look in the rush, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines in, the rush says as follows: Harehin kayomen lo amar klum, kedeprishis lael, dahavile kiyum bitos. Now, I will say the rush says the reason for this is because this is a mistaken affirmation. Why is it a mistaken affirmation? I will say because it doesn't make sense that anyone would make such a statement like this. Any neder you make, I hereby, what? Why on earth? I will say it's such an illogical statement to make, and it's opening yourself up to affirm nedarim that are clearly not going to be good nedarim. So therefore, again, this is the Rush's idea. He says, it's because again, it's very possible and maybe even likely that there will be nedarim that she will make that he will not like. So because of that, again, the Rush says proactive affirmation does not work. I will say, if you go to the other column, all the way in the margin, the left-hand margin, Tosis about 20 lines up from the bottom, says the same thing as well. Gomer belibo lekayim. Because what says, Tosis spells out a little bit more over here. He doesn't really mean to commit to what it is that he's saying. Why? Because they're going to be nedarim that he may not like. Therefore, we'll say this is considered to be like a mistaken affirmation. So we'll say this is halacha number 1. So you cannot make a proactive affirmation, and the Rush and Tosas both explaining to us why, because this is what's called a kiyum bitos, a mistaken affirmation. Why is it a mistaken affirmation? Because essentially to give that type of, we'll call it, carte blanche affirmation, that doesn't make any sense. Because he runs the possibility of nedarim that he doesn't want, or nedarim ultimately, again, that are contraindicated to be affirmed. And therefore, again, it's called the kiyum b'tos, therefore it doesn't work. Okay, what about the reverse? What about harehein mufarin? So what about the reverse case? A man says to his wife, any neder you make between now and the time that I return, from wherever, should be revoked. So we'll say now a proactive revocation. Does such a statement work or not? So here's the machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Mufar. Rabbi Eliezer says, yep, it works. The Chum say ain't a Mufar. The Chum say it does not work. Okay, so we'll say, so what's at the core of the machlokes over here? So the Gemara says, listen to this. So Rabbi Eliezer says like this. I want to tell you why proactive revocation works. So we'll say, I just want to point out something very interesting. In proactive affirmation, there's no machlokes. Everyone agrees it does not work. It would be called a kiyum bitos. Proactive revocation, Rabbi Eliezer says works. Chacham say does not work. Okay, what Rabbi Eliezer now explains his position. Here we go. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Im hefer nedarim sheba lechlal iser, lo yafer nedarim shelo ba lechlal iser. So I'll say Rabbi Eliezer's logic is an interesting kal v'chomer. He says if a husband could revoke a neder which already took hold, then of course he could revoke a neder proactively before it took hold. I'm supposed to say, Rabbi Eliezer's logic is like this. It's much harder to undo a reality than it is to what? Prevent the reality from ever occurring. By the Rebbe say, what a profound statement. It is much harder to undo a current reality than it is to prevent a reality from ever occurring. So Rabbi Eliezer will say like this, if halacha l'maisa, a husband could revoke his wife's neder, I will say, what's involved in the revocation of the neder? What's involved? A woman makes a neder. We'll say, what happens if she makes the neder? What happens? There's a reality. There's a reality that's occurred. So now a husband has the power to take a current reality and mamish uproot it. That's incredible. You could change reality. So if you could change reality, you could certainly prevent the neder from ever occurring. I will say, by the way, what an incredible Musar Haskell also. I will say it is easier to go ahead and, or I should say it's harder to uproot a current reality than it is to prevent a reality from occurring. I will say, you know what that's the difference between? That's the difference between doing tshuva and refraining from sin to begin with. Should I will say, what's tshuva? Tshuva, ultimately, again, is changing reality. Tshuva is taking one reality and ultimately changing that reality. Depending on what type of tshuva you do, right, it determines how much you change reality, right? The Gemara Maseches Yoma says we learn this. If you do tshuva meira, right, you have the ability to go ahead and transform your averos into shkagos, into accidental acts. You go ahead and you do tshuva me'ava, you have the ability to do what? Turn your averos into zechuyos. So I will say tshuva is the power through which I have the ability to change reality. But tshuva is a hard process. You know what's even better than tshuva, I will say? You know what's even better than tshuva? It's interesting to think about. What's even better than tshuva? Not sinning at all. Even better, certainly much easier said than done. Right? But again, I will say it's something to think about, that even better than tshuva is the ability to kind of hold myself back, restrain myself a little bit so that the negative reality itself never occurs. Okay, but so I'll say, what Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer, listen to this. Rabbi Eliezer will say like this, if I have the power to do tshuva and change reality, then Rabbi Eliezer also have the power to do what? To exercise self-restraint. If I have the power to do tshuva and change my reality, I certainly have the power to exercise self-restraint as well. What a musar. In any event, so we'll say, back to Nedarim. That's Rabbi Eliezer's. That's Rabbi Eliezer. By the way, you begin to see that there's a very strong, in general, throughout the Masechta, a very strong link between the concept of Nedarim and the concept of Tshuva. Because both represent, again, the creation of realities, the annulment of realities, the revocation of realities, meaning one thing. So we see that theme throughout the Masechta. In any event, so Eliezer will say like this, if halacha l'maisa, husband has the ability to annul the neder once it takes effect, he certainly has the ability to block it from ever occurring. What do the Chum say to that? And therefore, I will say, in Rabbi Eliezer's worldview, a proactive revocation absolutely works. Fine. So I'll say, what do the Chachamim say? The Chum say, Amrullah, the Chum say back to him, no. Harihu Omer, Isha Yikimenu, V'Isha Yiferenu. So I'll say, the Chachamim say to Rabbi Eliezer like this, it's not a Kal V'chomer. Rather, again, it's a pasuk. The pasuk says, the husband will affirm the neder. the husband will revoke the neder. And therefore the Chum understand, as sheba lechlal hakim, ba lechlal hafer. They both say, what kind of neder can you annul? What kind of neder can you annul? Only a neder which can be affirmed. Right? Lo ba lechlal hakim, if a neder can't be affirmed, then what? Lo ba lechlal hafer. Shabbos says, this is very interesting. So the same way, so the Chum will say, the only way to be mefer a neder is if it's the type of neder which can be affirmed. What's the type of neder which can be affirmed? One that the woman has articulated. But remember again, we just said before, like proactive affirmation doesn't work. So in order for a neder, in other words, the pasuk is linking revocation to affirmation. What type of neder can be revoked? The same type of neder which can be affirmed, i.e., one that has been made already. So a neder which has been made, the husband could affirm it or the husband could revoke it. A neder which hasn't been made, the husband can't affirm it. If he can't affirm it, therefore what? He can't revoke it. So the Rabbi say, take a look at the Ran for just a moment. So the Ran, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, about 14 lines up from the bottom of the Ran. Es shebalach hakim nedarim shechalu lo balach hakim. Sorry. So so Nedarim, which can be affirmed, which means Nedarim that were made, ultimately again can be revoked. Lo balach hakim, but again Nedarim which cannot be affirmed, i.e. Nedarim shelo chalu lo bo'u lechlal hafer. The afal gav the ika kavachomer bal karcha chikishin hakavser. So Rabbi, it's very interesting. The Chachamim say, Rabbi Eliezer, we love your kavachomer. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. But Lamaisa, what's the problem over here? The problem over here is we have a pasuk. So both say, so let's take a step back. Now we have the whole Mishnah. So both say, so two cases in the Mishnah. Case number one is proactive affirmation. What's the halacha proactive affirmation? Everyone agrees, doesn't work. Why? Because if he does it, what do we call that? A kiyum bitos, a mistaken affirmation. Because to give that type of carte blanche affirmation, knowing full well that she may make nedarim that he's not going to agree with, is a serious problem. So everyone agrees proactive affirmation does not work. What about proactive revocation? So this is the machlokas, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham. So again, Rabbi Eliezer will say it works. Why? Based on a kavachomer. If halacha l'maisa, a husband has the ability to revoke his wife's nedarim, in other words, if he has the ability to actively uproot a current reality, he certainly has the ability to what? To prevent that reality from occurring to begin with. To begin with. So, and that's why, again, proactive revocation will work. The Chum will say, okay, I hear the Kavachomer, but Lamai said it's a pasuk. Isha yikimenu, v'isha yifirenu. Only a neder which can be affirmed can be revoked. What's the type of neder that can be affirmed? One that was made. So therefore, again, only neder that can be affirmed can be revoked, and therefore proactive revocation will not work. Good. So we'll say that's the machlokes. Very exciting. Yibaylo. Shavuos is very interesting. So now the Gemara is going to focus. For the rest of the daf, we're really going to be focused on Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer is telling us that proactive revocation works. Now we'll say in that model, what are the mechanics? Here we go. Yibaylo. Rabbi Eliezer, mechal cholin ubetelin, ol dilma lo cholin klal. So we'll say in the mechanics of Rabbi Eliezer's model, where proactive revocation works. How does it work? Let's play this out. Right? Reuven's married to Rachel. So Reuven is going ahead and he's going away, and he says to Rachel, any nedarim you take between now and when I get back in a month from now are proactively revoked. Rabbi Eliezer says it works. Okay, so let's play this out. Now, 2 days later, Rachel makes a neder. I'm not going to eat bread. Shabbos says, so now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, what happens to that neder? What happens? It's revoked. So here's the shaila. When we say it's revoked, what happens? Is it that the neder is chal, it works, and then the revocation kicks in, or that the revocation prevents it, the proactive revocation prevents it from ever being chal at all? In other words, the neder is never even, it never is valid, even for a moment. But say, take a quick look at the Ran, again, right where we left off. Rabbi Eliezer mechal chaylim bebatlin. Rabbi Eliezer damar matzi mefer nedar kodim shetidar. According to Rabbi Eliezer, holds that proactive revocation works. Mi amrinam da'osan nedarim shenadra la'achar hafara chayli da'afar lo ma'akva b'hu milu batlim. Do we say the neder is chal? So when Rachel says, I'm not going to eat bread, the neder is chal. But a moment after it's chal, what happens? It's revoked. Ol Dilma, lo chayli klal. Or maybe no, the neder never even takes effect for a moment. Why? Kevad shefer la kodem shehefra la kol b'shishra. So we'll say, you know what the Gemara is essentially asking? What's the definition of proactive revocation? Does proactive revocation mean that halacha lamaisa, the neder never even takes effect? Proactive revocation means it stops it at the gate and never, or no, proactive revocation says is Rachel makes a neder, right? For the moment she makes the neder is chal, and then the next second the revocation comes in and knocks it off. Says the Gemara, "Ma'anaf kamina." Who cares? Who cares? Like what does it matter? So this is very interesting. I was like, look, Ayin Hamed Beis Kigon the itfis acharina bahadein nidra. So I will say this is actually really quite interesting. Where does it make a difference? So I will say, imagine the following situation, right? So Rachel goes ahead. Rachel's married to Ruvain. Remember, same case, right? Ruvain says, I'm going out of town. I'll be out of town for the next month. Any Nedarim you make until I get back ultimately are annulled. Rabbi Eliezer says proactive revocation works. Fine. 2 days later, Rachel says, I'm not eating bread. And I will say, so now what happens? Rachel has a friend, Leah, right? And Leah says, Gamani. You know what? I'm in. All right. We're going on the bread diet, right? Gamani. I'm not doing that either. I'm not doing it. So we'll say, so what's that's called hatfasa. So we'll say you could do that, right? You could do that. In other words, you can go ahead and attach yourself to someone else's neder. The truth is, the paradigmatic example is that the Rush brings down, I will say, is really by a nazir, right? So okay, let's change it to keep it consistent, right? So 2 days after Reuben leaves, Rachel decides she's going to be a nazira. So she says, Hareini Nazira. Her friend Leah hears this, and she says, Gamani. I'm in also. So she's piggybacking on Rachel's neder. So we'll say, now watch this. I amrit chalin havya tifisusa. So we'll say, if you say that Rachel's neder is chal, even for just a moment, that's fine. Then Leah can piggyback on it. I amrit lo chalin lo ika mishasha. But I will say, if the proactive revocation means that what? The neder never even takes effect for a moment, even just for a moment, then what? Then there's no hatfasa. Then there's no linking on to, there's no piggybacking on that neder. I will say, take a quick look at the rush. Right, left-hand margin. Kigon shamra harini nazira, v'shama echad v'amar va'ani b'soch kidei dibur. All right, so they're just giving us more specifics. All right, so Rachel makes the neder. I'm going to be in a zero 2 days after Reuven left. Leah hears it. She says, Gamani. Right, me too. I'm in. So unihi debatli la'alter hainu b'chdei shfar. So we'll say Rosh Kazan. So we'll say, so that's the shaila. So the Gemara says, so what's the halacha? So we'll say, so I just want to be clear. So now what we're going to be doing for the rest of the time is really focusing on this one specific question. In the mechanics of Shitas Rabbi Eliezer, in the mechanics that proactive revocation works. How does proactive revocation work? Does proactive revocation mean that it stunts the neder from even being chal? That proactive, literally, again, there's no neder. She makes the neder, and we'll say, what does proactive revocation do? Boom, smashes it right there, stops it right there. It's never even chal for a moment. Or no, it's chal, because when a person makes a neder, it's chal. And what does proactive revocation do? The moment after it's chal, what happens? The annulment comes and annuls it or revokes it. So that's the shaila. Mai. So we'll see. Now we're going to try to discuss this. So Tashma, Amr Rabbi Eliezer, Im hafer nedarim shabal lechlal iser, lo yafer nedarim shabal lechlal. Lo, sorry, Amr Rabbi Eliezer. So let's listen to this. We're going to quote as follows. Amr Rabbi Eliezer, Im hafer nedarim shabal lechlal iser. So we'll say this was Rabbi Eliezer's statement in the Mishnah, right? What did Rabbi Eliezer say? If a husband has the ability to annul his wife's nedarim once they've actually taken effect, so lo yafer nedarim shelo ba'ol lichlal iser, certainly he should be able to annul a neder before it creates iser, which Rabbi say sounds like what? We'll say what that sounds like just from the wording of Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah. We'll say, how does proactive revocation work? What does it sound like? It prevents it from ever being chal, right? Shma mina lo chalin. So I'll say, just if you look at, again, I don't know, at least when I first read the Mishnah, that's how you understand what Eliezer is saying. Proactive revocation means it stops it. It's never even chal for. Look at the lashon. If a husband has the ability to go ahead and annul his wife's nedarim, shaba'u lichlal iser. What does it mean? Shaba'u lichlal iser mean? They came true. In other words, they came to be already. Right. In other words, the neder was chal. Then what? Lo yafer nedarim shelo ba'u lichlal iser. certainly you could go ahead and annul Nedarim that have not yet come to reality, which sounds like, again, Shmami na lo chalin. It sounds like proactive revocation means husband prevents the neder from ever being chal. To which the Gemara says, no. Mikatoni shein ba'in. The Mishnah doesn't say that they never come. Shelo ba'u katoni. Adayin lo ba'u. We'll say what the Mishnah means to say is like this. The Mishnah is not saying that when she makes a neder, the neder is not chal. The Mishnah is saying that the whole chap of proactive revocation is he's making a statement about things that have not yet occurred. Shelo ba'u, they haven't occurred. But when they do occur, it's possible that what? They'll be chal, even just for a moment, and then proactive revocation comes in and ultimately annuls it. So we'll say, it's just saying, let me read it again. Mikatani she'in ba'in. Did the Mishnah say that the neder that she, with proactive revocation, the neder that she makes never comes to an isur, i.e. is not chal? No. Shelo ba'u katani. It means if a husband has the ability to annul nedarim of his wife that she has already made, he has the ability to annul the nedarim that she has not yet made. But again, it's quite possible when she makes them, what are the mechanics? She makes the neder, it's chal, and then a moment later, the proactive revocation sets in. Adayin lo ba'u. So take a quick look at the Rush for just a moment. So the Rush says, Mikatani she'in ba'in, dahavi mashma af achar shetidor osan ena ba'in lechal iser. So I will say, if it would have said she'in ba'in, the lashon of she'in ba'in is on the neder. In other words, that the neder itself never has the ability to materialize. But that's not what it says. Shelo ba'u katani. That they have not yet come into being, meaning what? In other words, shelo ba'u means she has not yet made any vows. But when she makes vows, it's possible that what are the mechanics? The vow is chal, even just for a moment. And then lamaisa, then the hafara, and then the annulment kicks in. So therefore I will say, no raya from the Mishnah. So again, just to be clear, we're still focused on our same question, which is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, in the world of proactive revocation, how does proactive revocation work? Halacha l'maisa doesn't mean that the neder takes effect for a moment and then the revocation comes in and cancels it, or no, proactive revocation stunts it and prevents the neder from ever being chal even for just a moment. So we haven't answered it. Yeah, next. Tashma. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, so we'll say here, now the Gemara is quoted from the Tosefta. So Rabbi Eliezer, Uma b'makom she'in mefer nidre atzmo. This is very interesting, I will say. Rabbi Eliezer will say, this is, remember, Tosefta is just another version of the same machlokes. So ma b'makom she'in mefer nidre atzmo mishenadar, mefer nidre atzmo ad shelo yidar. So I will say, another argument Rabbi Eliezer advances to the Chachamim. A person has the ability, I will say, well, let's take a step back. A person doesn't have the ability to be made for his own nedarim. Right? This is Nedarim 101. I make a neder, I cannot annul my own neder. Once I make a neder, I myself cannot annul it. But watch this. I will say, what can I do? I can proactively annul my own vows. I will say, how do I proactively annul my own vows? We learned this. Sugya. Right? I will say, what do we call this? Call Nidre. Right? You have this. I will say, if you take a quick look, we're going to do a lot of Rush today. I'm sorry. Go back to the Rush for just a moment. The Rush says, Mefer Nidre Atzmo Achelo Yidar. You could proactively annul your own vows before you vow. The Rush says, Kidamar Parak Dalin Nedarim. Harotz Shlois Kaimu Nedar V'Shal Kol Hashana. Yami B'Rashana V'Yomar. Kol Nedarim Sha'ani Asid Lidar Bazu Hashana. Yiyu B'Teilin. So listen, now watch this. When it comes to my own Nedarim, this is fascinating. When it comes to my own Nedarim, what's the halacha? I cannot annul my own neder once I've made it. But what can I do? I could proactively annul my Nedarim. How can I proactively annul my Nedarim? At Rosh Hashanah, I get up, I say, Hinni Muchra Mazuman, and right, I'm hereby proactively annulling all of my Nedarim for the year. Right? Shloshiririn v'la kayamin, butelin and muvutalin. Batal, right? The proactive revocation. Now listen, now watch this. So the Gemara says, Makom, shemefer nidra ishto mishatidar, eino din shiyafar nidra ishto ad shalot tidar. Now listen to this. So in the Tosefta's version, This was the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says, if when it comes to my own Nedarim, once I made it, I can't be made for it. Yet what? Proactive revocation is permitted when it comes to the Nedarim of my wife, where I do have the ability to annul it once she's made it. I should also have the ability to what? To proactively annul all Nedarim as well. So I will say, so now, by the way, now we're comparing over here the ability for me to proactively annul my Nedarim with the ability to proactively annul my wife's Nedarim. Now the Gemara says, my love, the ishta dumya delay. Are we not saying that the annulment, proactive annulment of my wife's Nedarim is like the proactive annulment of my own Nedarim? How so? Mahu delo chaylen. They will say, when I do proactive Nedarim revocation for myself, what are the mechanics of that? What are the mechanics? I make a neder, and what happens? Well, let's play this out. I stand up Rosh Hashanah. I say Kol Midrei with Kavana, and I'm proactively annulling all of my nedarim. Fine. 2 days later, I make a neder. What's the halacha with that neder? Right? Was that neder chal at all? No, not even for a moment. Not even for a moment. Ooh, okay. So now, according to this version, Rabbi Eliezer is saying like this. Well, it's just follow the Kal V'chomer. If a person doesn't have the ability to be made for his own neder, but yet he can proactively revoke his own nedarim. So certainly, when it comes to his wife, where if she makes a neder, he can revoke it. He certainly can what? Proactively revoke her nedarim. So we'll say. So what are we doing? We're comparing personalistic proactive revocation, ultimately again, to marital proactive revocation, right? And therefore we're going to say, just like in personalistic proactive revocation, ultimately again, that prevents the neder from ever being chal. So too again, if I proactively revoke my wife's nedarim, that should also prevent them from ever being chal, even for just a moment. So the Gemara says, Mahu delo chaylon, just like my nedarim, if I proactively revoke them, they're never chal. Af ishtonami delo chaylon. So to my wife, it must be the one I do. According to Rabbi Eliezer, when you do proactive revocation, the neder is never chal at all. Wow, pretty solid. Except the Gemara says, lo. Hakidisa v'hakidisa. Now, I will say, you can't necessarily compare the two. In other words, I understand the Kal V'chomer, right? Rabbi said the Kal V'chomer that Rabbi Eliezer is making is like this, which again, I just want to point out, now you have two different versions of the Kal V'chomer, right? In our Mishnah, the version of the Kal V'chomer was, if a husband has the ability to revoke his wife's neder once it's created a reality, you can certainly revoke the neder before the reality is created. In other words, that Kal V'chomer is predicated on the idea that it's halachically much harder to undo a reality than it is to prevent a reality from occurring. So if you have the power to undo the reality, i.e. to revoke your wife's nedarim, you certainly have the ability to what? Proactively revoke them as well. In the Tosefta's version, the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Eliezer is like this. If a person who doesn't have the ability to revoke his own nedarim can proactively revoke his own nedarim, so then certainly for his wife, where he does have the ability to revoke her nedarim, he certainly could go ahead and proactively revoke her nedarim. Now, the Gemara essentially wanted to take that Kal V'chomer one step further and compare the mechanisms for personal proactive revocation to marital proactive revocation. And just like again, by personal proactive revocation, my proactive revocation prevents my neder from even being chal for just a moment. Perhaps that's what should happen when I proactively revoke the nedarim of my wife, to which the Gemara says, no. All the Kal V'chomer does is create the reality for proactive revocation in the context of a wife's nedarim. The mechanisms, however, still may be different. It's possible to say that when it comes to personalistic proactive revocation, that prevents my neder from even being chal for just a moment. But when it comes ultimately again to proactive revocation for a wife, maybe the neder is chal for a moment and then is actively revoked after that. So hakadisa just means the mechanisms may operate differently. Okay, so therefore I will say, very interesting Gemaras, but we haven't answered our question yet. Let's go back there. Tashma. So this is very interesting. Amrullah Rabbi Eliezer. I will say now in this context over here. So this is the same Tosefta. In the same Tosefta, so the Chachamim answered up. They responded to the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll say, so again, everything we're doing now is a flow of the conversation from the Tosefta. So Rabbi Eliezer made his Kal V'chomer. Right? So remember again, what was his Kal V'chomer? If I don't have the ability to revoke my own Nedarim proactively, but engage in proactive revocation, and it works, so for my wife, where I can revoke her Nedarim, I certainly could go ahead and what? Engage in proactive revocation. Now the Chachamim respond. Here we go. Amrulo Rabbi Eliezer. Says Rabbi Eliezer, Uma mikvah, shemales hatmei mitumasan, ein matzah Torah. A mikvah, right? A mikvah, which has the ability to go ahead and what? Well, so what does a mikvah do? A mikvah has the ability to change the status of something, right? You take something that's tamei, you put into a mikvah, whether that thing is me, right, or an object or something else, right? So I take something that is tamei, I immerse it in a mikvah, and it becomes tahar. Yet, ein matzil al hatahorim mili tamei. But what can't you do? This would be great if you could do it, right? Proactive immersion to stave off tumah doesn't work. But how great would that be? How great? In other words, think about it even just for myself. I go to the mikvah, I say, you know what, this is a proactive, this is my sin barrier, right? My sin barrier, right? I'm now coated, right? Or I go ahead and I immerse my utensils, right? Therefore they can't become, doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we'll say, but before we go on, just understand what the Chacham are doing over here. The Chacham is saying, just because you can see, Rabbi Eliezer's entire Kal V'chomer, I will say, is predicated on what? At least from the Mishnah originally. If you could change the status of something, you certainly could what? Prevent the status from ever occurring. That's his whole logic. The Chacham says, that's not true, right? Mikvah is the greatest raya to that. Mikvah has the ability to change status, but yet what? It doesn't have the ability to prevent. Now, I will say, according to the Rush, the rest of the quotation over here is not really necessary for the proof, because that's we'll get to. But let's just look at it. The Gemara says, Adam sheimalas atanim. Yet, interestingly enough, by a person, I will say, right? A person himself, ultimately again, cannot change the status of something that is tamei, right? She'in malas atmei mitumasan. Ein odin shelo yatzil. Shabbos says, listen to this. It's actually very interesting. So a mikvah, which has the ability to go ahead and change the status of something from tamei to tahar, yet can't proactively prevent something from becoming tamei. I would have thought that a person, therefore, bless you, who doesn't have the ability to change the status of something from tamei to tahar, certainly doesn't have the ability to prevent something from becoming tamei to begin with. Now, I both say, let me just give you the context of that. That happens to be, the Gemara says, an untrue statement. Why? Listen to this case. A person, right? Obviously, a person himself cannot go ahead and prevent something from becoming tamei. Right? I'm sorry. Cannot make something that is tamei tar. Interesting, I'll say, listen to the following case. What happens if a person, in the Gemara's case, a person swallows a ring, and he walks into a house where there's tumas meis, So I'll say, so now what happens? So what's his status if he walks into a house where there's tumas meis? He's tamei. What's the status of the ring? The ring is tar. So in other words, technically speaking, we're to excrete the ring, right? And then you put it on after washing it, right? So you go ahead, right? You're right to go ahead and put it on. So halacha l'maisa, that ring is tahar. So we'll say, so what the Rabbanan are trying to show over here, I will say something very interesting, which is Rabbi Eliezer's whole logic is, if you could undo a reality, if you could take a reality and change it, you certainly could prevent it from ever occurring. And all the Chacham is saying to Rabbi Eliezer is, that's not true. That's simply not true. Mikvah is a perfect raya to that. Mikvah has the ability to change realities, yet mikvah cannot work in a proactive fashion. Interestingly enough, a person who cannot change reality of tumah to tara, ultimately what? Can act in a preventative measure. I would say, by the way, that case, I just want to point out, that case of the person who swallows the ring, he walks into the house that is tamei. And so what happens? He becomes tamei, but the ring becomes tahar. I would say, what a beautiful Musar Haskell. You know what that tells us? I would say, that's why no matter what you do in life, your neshama remains untainted. Because the neshama is not something I wear on the sleeve. The neshama is something that is embedded inside of me. And the same way that the ring, once it's swallowed, is not impacted by the tumah on the outside, the neshama, which is part of my pnimius, which is part of my inside, no matter what happens on the outside of us, no matter what I do, no matter where I go, no matter how I act, neshama shenasata bi tahorihi. The neshama is always pure. The neshama always remains untainted. You could go to whatever places of tumah, engage in whatever kinds of tumah, but then the kedusha of the neshama always remains intact. Why? Because it's part of my inside, and that which is inside of me is never impacted ultimately again by what happens on the outside. The ring remains tar, the neshama remains. So I will say, by the way, this is why. Why is tshuva possible? Why is tshuva possible at the end of the day, right? Think about it. I mess up so badly in life, and I mess up repeatedly. And the truth is, for years and years and years, I'm engaging in negative behaviors. Why is tshuva possible? Tshuva is possible because no matter what I've done externally, the neshama always remains intact. The neshama always remains pure. And therefore, as soon as I'm ready to access it, it gives me the koach to do tshuva. It's incredible. So I will say, but again, shma mina, lo chaylin. I will say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? From the way that ultimately, again, by the way that the Chachamim are interacting, or the way the Chachamim are phrasing this towards Rabbi Eliezer, you see that in their view, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the idea of his proactive revocation prevents the neder from ever being chal at all. In other words, I will say, the whole lashon over here from using the mikvah, right? Their raya with mikvah is, mikvah can't proactively prevent something from becoming tameh. The fact that that's what they're retorting to Rabbi Eliezer indicates to us that from their perspective, Rabbi Eliezer's view is that proactive revocation does what? Prevents the neder from ever taking hold. Ema Seifa, it was actually, you know what we're going to do is, never. Was this your first day in the shir? Say stuff like that. Hey, all right, fine. Now we're going forward. I involved. Ema Seifa. So we'll say, listen to this, right? What about the end, right? What about, just for another minute, right? Ema Seifa. Amr Rabbi Eliezer, imatbilin kli tamei litar, yatbilu kli l'cheshi tamei litar. So we'll say, so ultimately again, look at the end of that same Tosefta, Rabbi say. So what does it say? They said to Rabbi Eliezer, if you have the ability to be tovel a kli, right? So if you take a kli that's tamei, and ultimately again you can make it tar, so yatbilu kli l'shiyitma litar. Ultimately, again, can we proactively immerse the cleaning utensil so that if it becomes tamei, it should become tahar? So this is again the Chum arguing back on Rabbi Eliezer. Both say the problem is, what does it sound like from here? What's here the argument is, the Chum is saying to Rabbi Eliezer, if you could take a kli that's tamei and immerse it and make it tar, can you proactively take a kli that is tar and immerse it now so that when it becomes tamei, it can become tar? Rabbi say that logic sounds like what? They're saying, can you take a kli, immerse it now, so that when it becomes tamei, it will immediately become tar. What does that sound like? Sounds like they're saying, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the neder is chal for a moment, and then ultimately again, then is annulled. Shma mina chaylin. So we'll say, so therefore again, so we'll stop over here. We'll stop over here. So we'll say, so again, the most essential Ari Rabbanon Rabbanon lo kaimi lahom b'tamid Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi say the truth is. So now it's interesting. Just I want to point out from the Tosefta. So the Tosefta has two parts to it. Really three parts to it. The first part of the Tosefta is where Rabbi Eliezer advances his Kal V'chomer, and in this case again, his Kal V'chomer is different than the Kal V'chomer as espoused in the Mishnah. But that's okay. Same basic Kal V'chomer. The Rabbanon, the Chachamim, respond to Rabbi Eliezer in two ways. Both from mikvah, but just using two different examples of mikvah. The interesting part is the way they respond to Rabbi Eliezer in the first response makes it sound like their understanding of Rabbi Eliezer is that proactive revocation prevents the neder from ever being chal. In the second response they give to Rabbi Eliezer, it sounds like their understanding of Rabbi Eliezer is what? That the neder is chal and then immediately revoked. To which the Gemara essentially says, you're right. The Rabbanon don't really understand the position of Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll say we're gonna stop here. We're gonna do Misas Shem in just a moment. We're gonna stop here in just a moment. So I just want to point out where we're stopping at. Here's what we have. Right? Let's just bring it all together. Right? Halacha number one: proactive affirmation. Everyone agrees doesn't work. Why? Why? What does Rush call it? Tosas calls it kiyum b'tos. It's a potential of mistaken affirmation. Good. The machlokes case, proactive revocation. Rabbi Eliezer says it works. Chachamim say it does not work. Our entire sugya has been focused on the position of Rabbi Eliezer. Specifically, when Rabbi Eliezer says that proactive revocation works, I will say, what does that mean? Does that mean that ultimately, again, the neder is chal for a moment and then it's revoked? So in other words, it takes hold for a moment, then revocation occurs, or maybe proactive revocation says, prevents the neder from ever taking hold at all. Proactive revocation says, it stops the neder at the gate. What's the nafkamina? Ultimately, again, hatfasa. Could someone else piggyback on the neder that the wife made? If you hold that the neder is chal, even for just a moment, hatfasa will work. But l'maisa, again, if you hold that the neder is not chal, in other words, it's just stopped at the gate, it never takes effect, then piggybacking upon that neder will not work. What's the resolution? We don't have it yet. The good news is, we're not the only ones confused by the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim were as well. The Chacham were not sure in Rabbi Eliezer's model what the mechanics are. So we'll say, we'll stop here for today. We'll see the resolution of that in Mirat Hashem as well as the halacha l'maisa in Mirat Hashem tomorrow. But let's do a few moments of Mesilas Yesharim. All right, so we'll say good morning. So we are picking up now Mirat Hashem in Perek Yutes. So remember again, we're speaking about specifically the concept of kavod. The concept ultimately again of kavod. Remember, we're trying to become Hasidim, that's our goal. So we're speaking about the concept of kavod, of honor when it comes to the performance of mitzvos. The performance of mitzvos. 110, thank you. Good. 111. Oh no, I stopped early. Right, we're picking up Va'amru Odes. V'ulam. But I have V'amru B'sifri. Yeah, good. V'amru B'sifri, let's see where I end. V'seder, the Kama Dvarim. All right, perfect, good. So you just tell me where to stop. All right, good. So here we go. So V'amru B'sifri. Kol mivchar nidrechem, dahainu shelo yavi ala min mivchar. Kvar matzanu, the kind hevel. So we'll say, where do we see this concept? Ultimately, page 111. Again, I will say, I stopped the paragraph early from where we're supposed to start today. So, okay, good. So the Gemara says, "Kvar matzanu v'kain v'hevel." Right? We find by kain and hevel as well. Hevel hevi mi bechoros sonom mechal behen. Hevel brought again from the nicest parts of his carbon. Literally again, mechal bechoros sonom, from the firstborn of his sheep. Mechal behen the kain. Cain himself brought ultimately from the psolas, from right the inferior parts of that which grew from the ground. So we'll say, what happened? Hashem turned to Hevel and to his carbon, but he did not pay any attention ultimately to Cain and his carbon. I will say, what's the incredible chiddush in that? The incredible chiddush in that, I will say, is that, remember, whose idea was it to bring a carbon? It was Cain's idea, right? Remember again, Hevel was just copying his older brother. It wasn't Hevel's idea. Yet amazingly enough, Hevel is the one who understood the concept of Hider Mitzvah, who understood that if you're going to do something, do it right. So it was interesting. It was Cain's idea. But just so you understand, what was Cain's logic? Right? It's like to say, so what do you think? Cain was cheap? Just so you understand, there are 4 human beings in the world, right? There's plenty to go around, right? In other words, there's no shortage of anything. Maybe they're sick, right? It's true, the Cain and Hevel both born with twin sisters, right? So Lamaisa again, so there are 6 people in the world. There's plenty of stuff. So what do you mean Cain is cheap? Cain is not cheap. So what's the pshat? Cain said to himself, it's not for God. God doesn't need this. So again, I want to show that I'm being makki, I'm recognizing the Bari Olam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Cain figures Hashem doesn't need the nicest stuff. Hevel understands, you're right, God doesn't need it, but I need it. Because by giving the nicest, that's how I show ultimately that this is something that is incredibly important to me. That this is something that is meaningful. Va'omer, va'aru nochal v'yesh be'edro zachar, v'noder v'zaveach, mashchas la'Hashem, ki melech gadol ani. So we'll say, so literally translated over here, that if a person goes ahead and tries to offer a blemished animal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what are you doing? Ki melech gadol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a great king. The kama dvarim hisirun zichron levracha, shalei mitzvos bezuyas aleinu. And I will say, there are many things we have in halacha that literally mitzvos should not be treated in a degraded or depreciated fashion. Kvar amru, kala oches sefer Torah arum, whoever literally again goes ahead and holds a sefer Torah without a covering, nikbar arum, is buried unclothed, mipnei bizui ha-mitzvah. So we'll say, the idea over here is, now this is actually something a little bit different. This is talking about over here a person who touches a sefer Torah without the cover. So a person who touches sefer Torah without the cover, ultimately again is buried unclothed as well. But if the Gemara says unclothed from that mitzvah, what's the idea? That here I'm learning Torah, whatever it is I'm doing. But if I treat the Torah, the scroll itself, in a degraded fashion, then the mitzvah, although I'm doing the mitzvah becomes absolutely meaningless. Or in other words, in life, it's not just what you do, but it's how you do it that matters. And that's the whole idea of kavod when it comes to mitzvahs. It's not just about doing the mitzvah. It's about how I do the mitzvah that really broadcasts where I am, where I'm holding, and what the nature of my relationship with Hashem is. He goes on, bikurim, so we'll say one of the paradigmatic examples of this, of Hiddur Mitzvah, is Bikurim. The bringing of the first, we'll say it's one of the most beautiful Mishnayos in Bikurim. Shekach Shaninu, Hashar Holech Lifnei. We'll say the Mishnah over here, Perek Gimel Mishnah Gimel Maseches Bikurim, is describing how the Bikurim procession would take place in Yerushalayim itself. What would they do? Hashar Holech Lifneim, the kind of Mitzupazav, they would have an ox, right? An ox walking in front of the procession, and the ox's horns were covered in gold ribbons. Vateresh shazais barosha, and literally again a crown of olive branches on its head. Otsham hashir meviim bikurim bekaldo shalzav. The rich people would bring their bikurim in gold baskets. Vaniyim besali nitzarim, and ultimately the poor in baskets of reeds. But I will say, but the idea is everyone did something beautiful. Everyone found the way to beautify the mitzvah in accordance with their financial station. Otsham shalosh midos bikurim. There are three different ways of bringing bikurim. Bikurim, tosefes bikurim, v'itar bikurim. Ultimately, I will say there was the core obligation of bikurim. Tosefes bikurim means you added on. I will say, remember again, you added on other fruits. In other words, bikurim are one of those things that doesn't really have much of a shear. So you added on additional fruits. And Iter Bikurim, Rabbi say Uter Bikurim, ultimately again, it's very actually beautiful, is in the baskets of Bikurim, they used to surround the Bikurim with other fruit as well. Remember again, Bikurim only comes from Shiva Samina, from the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael. What they would do is when they would bring up their Bikurim in the baskets, they would line the baskets with other types of fruit to make it look beautiful as well. Harilanu Behedja, Kama Railanu Lahosif al Gufa Shal Mitzvah Kedei Lahadra. Rabbi say, so we see explicitly how important Hiddur Mitzvah is, how we're supposed to add on to the core obligation in order to beautify the mitzvah. From here, I'll say from Bikurim and these other examples, we learn that to apply this concept of Hiddur to all mitzvahs in the Torah. V'amru Rava Rami Puzmiki Umatzi. It's very beautiful. Rava used to put on special slippers in order to daven. V'amar hikon likras elokecha Yisrael. He would say, prepare yourself to meet your God, Klal Yisrael. So we'll say, by the way, this comes the concept, and it's very important, of dressing a certain way when we daven. We'll say, so it's interesting. What's the Hiddur Mitzvah by Tefillah? The Hiddur Mitzvah by Tefillah is being dressed for the occasion. All right, again, a lot of this is societally driven. But I will say, but you have to think to yourself, like, a person shouldn't come dressed for davening any less than you would come dressed to go to a work meeting. That's it. Whatever you were to work. I don't know. Maybe you're a business casual, or I don't know. Maybe people today are very casual in general. You're even for business meetings. Okay, but however you would go, right? However you would go to a meeting, right? For customers, or that's how you should come dressed to shul. That's the Hiddur Mitzvah when it comes to tefillah. Otherwise, I will say, what am I doing? Otherwise, it's dressed down for God. But unlike the workplace, which may have casual Fridays, right? For tefillah, it's casual every day. And once you understand what that does is, so I'm not giving tefillah. In other words, then I'm lacking Hiddur. Is the tefillah good? Of course. But Lamaisa, the Hider mitzvah by Tefillah, ultimately is I'm dressing for the occasion. I don't have to wear my suit. I don't have to wear a jacket and anything. But I'm saying like some way that shows that Lamaisa, I am prepared for this occasion. Ot Amru Rabbi saying, Al Pasuk, listen to this. Big day Esav b'na Hagadah Chamudos. So listen to this. Remember again the story with Yaakov and Esav, where Yaakov goes in to take the brachas. So what does Rivka do? She dresses Yaakov in Esav's big day Esav b'na Hagadah Chamudos, the nice clothing of Esav. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Anishi mashtes Abba begadim milchlachim, aval Esav kishaya mishamish es aviv lahayu mishamish ela bebig day malchus. I will say, wow. Do you know what the nice clothing of Esav was reserved for? It was reserved for when he went to take care of his father. That's when he would put on his Shabbos clothing. Shabbos, he wasn't wearing Shabbos clothing, right? Esav's Shabbos clothing, ultimately, again, was for where he went ahead and took care of his father. It's incredible. V'hinei, im kein labasar, I will say, if Esav got dressed appropriately in order to take care of his father, then Alachas Kam say how I have to come dressed when ultimately again I come to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ra'oi hu sheyilbash big day covered the yeshiv lefanav kamishi yoshev lemelach gadol. I have to wear appropriate clothing and sit before my king, or sit before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like one would sit before a great king. Say, by the way, what a powerful musar. What a powerful musar. If Esav got dressed up to serve his mortal father, then Rabbi say how much we have to make sure that we are dressed appropriately. Again, whatever appropriate means, right? We are dressed appropriately, but we know, each of us knows for ourselves what's appropriately, right? We have to be dressed appropriately in order to come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. Is that it? One more, good. V'hinei, b'chlal zeh, yesh kibbur HaShabbos Yom Tovim. Let's listen to this. Included in this is covered Shabbos and Yom Tov, displaying proper honor to Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shekol ha'marbe v'chabdom, Vandai osa nachas ruach liyosro. It will say because whoever honors the Shabbos appropriately gives incredible nachos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shekein sivanu v'chi badito. The pasuk says you shall honor the Shabbos. Now that we know that honoring the Shabbos is a mitzvah, hine mine hakibod rabim heim. There are many different types of kibud, many different types of honor. Achaklalhu shekol ma'aseh shebo nira chashivos l'Shabbos tzrichim anu laso. So I will say, but rather, what do we see? That halacha l'maisa, any type of honor that we could give to Shabbos, ultimately we're obligated to do so. And I will say, we'll stop over here for today, but l'maisa, again, we're going to see that honor we give to Shabbos is not an honor to Shabbos. I mean, it is an honor to Shabbos. But ultimately, who am I really honoring? He who gave me Shabbos, i.e. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I will say, what's really nice about this now is we understand what the Ramchal did over here is something he doesn't do in every single piece, which is he gave us a concept. The concept is to become a chassid, Remember again, this is in the second part of Chassidus of Ofen Ha'asiyah, the manner in which we perform mitzvos. And now we're discussing that it's important to perform mitzvos with a sense of kavod, a sense of honor. How does one perform mitzvos with a sense of honor? So now one way we're looking at is hider mitzvah, beautification of the mitzvah itself. And understand, when I beautify the mitzvah, in that way, ultimately, I'm giving additional kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So tomorrow we'll pick up with the sugya of kavod Shabbos. Very beautiful. I'll say, shkoyach.